Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer has said that a number of countries were ready to join Europe's new coalition of the willing to help Ukraine. Starmer made the comments at the conclusion of today's security summit in London, aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. More than a dozen high-ranking delegates attended the talks, including Ukraine's President Volodymr Zelenskyy. Efforts to resolve the war with Russia and bolster European defenses have taken on added urgency as the U.S. signals it's less willing to support Ukraine. Starmer stressed that Europe has to step up and do the heavy lifting to defend itself.
We will go further to develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace. Not every nation will feel able to contribute, but that can't mean that we sit back. Instead, those willing will intensify planning now with real urgency. The UK is prepared to back this with boots on the ground and planes in the air. Together with others, Europe must do the heavy lifting. But to support peace in our continent and to succeed, this effort must have strong US backing. We're working with the US on this point after my meeting with President Trump last week. And let me be clear, we agree with the President on the urgent need for a durable peace. Now we need to deliver together.
Here's a quick recap of the summit's results as Keir Starmer presented them. Starmer said the states will keep military aid to Ukraine flowing and keep increasing economic pressure on Russia. Leaders also agreed that any lasting peace must ensure Ukraine's sovereignty and security, and Ukraine must be at the table. Third, in the event of a peace deal, the states will keep boosting Ukraine's defensive capabilities to deter any future invasion. Fourth, they will develop a coalition of the willing to defend a deal in Ukraine and to guarantee the peace. DW's Teri Schultz gave me her take on Prime Minister Starmer's remarks.
Well, Keir Starmer clearly wanted to emphasize that everyone is taking this more seriously than ever before. He said today is a crossroads. And you saw that picture of all the leaders of the biggest European Union and NATO countries sitting around a table with Volodymr Zelenskyy and Emmanuel Macron there at the head of the table. Very important optics to show that this deal has everyone there on board and that they're going to take it forward. Now, you also had, a collection of things we've heard before. Not a lot of new items in this plan. We already know that the Europeans have been working on a ceasefire, a monitoring force for any potential ceasefire with the UK and France in the lead. He repeated that. But he also repeated that that's going to be dependent, on U.S. guarantees. So there are a lot of questions that remain after this press conference by Keir Starmer, but clearly they want it to be seen as a very important, firm step forward.
He said, of course, that U.S. support remains essential. And I realize I'm asking you to look into your geopolitical crystal ball, but how is that going to happen?
Starmer was asked about that directly because President Donald Trump has said that there will be no American boots on the ground. As far as I know, he has not completely ruled out the U.S. support in other ways, reconnaissance aircraft potentially, intelligence help for a potential European force, and importantly, possible U.S. warplanes at the ready in case Russia were to attack European troops who would be keeping this hypothetical ceasefire. So Starmer said that he'd been talking to Donald Trump as recently as yesterday about this and that he would not be moving forward with this plan if he didn't think he could get the U.S. on board.
What are you hearing? What is the sense? Will a coalition of the willing be enough for Ukraine?
There's not really any choice at this point, Michael. You can't get every country to support Ukraine. You've got Hungary and Slovakia constantly blocking financial assistance, saying they won't send any weapons to Ukraine. You have to simply gather those who will and do what they can. So that's what they're doing right now. Of course, the UK being a very important ally of Ukraine and a very important military power, but outside the European Union. So you need to have configurations like Keir Starmer has put together today so that you're not excluding the UK, and you've got Turkey at the table as well, NATO's second largest military. So this is a strong coalition, and they know that this is really Ukraine's best chance and their own best chance. Their security is indivisible from Ukraine's security. They've got to try to move forward like they're doing today.
All of this, of course, happening under the shadow of the debacle in the Oval Office the other day. How do you think this summit is being viewed in the White House?
Well, I think this was a very delicate diplomatic dance for Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, the two leaders with probably the closest ties, other than NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, to Donald Trump. They know that he could possibly be disappointed and disapprove of their close relationship, their warm embrace of Volodymr Zelenskyy, who was kicked out of the White House on Friday. But I have to say, Michael, I checked Donald Trump's X account and his Truth Social account before rejoining you here, and he hasn't said anything about the summit. He was talking about cryptocurrency. So at the moment, he hasn't poo-pooed what happened in London today. He also hasn't supported it. So we don't really know how he's going to receive what Keir Starmer came out and announced today after this meeting.
DW's correspondent Teri Schultz doing her own heavy lifting today in Brussels. Truly appreciated. Yevheniia Kravchuk is a member of the Ukrainian parliament and vice president of ALDE, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. I asked her if she found Keir Starmer's words that Europe would do the heavy lifting for Ukraine reassuring.
Well, of course, it is very important that Great Britain had shown the leadership in collecting the like-minded countries around the table. And we also will be seeing the European EU summit on the March 6th, bringing together all of the EU countries. But I think your colleague had made a great point, because you see at the table not just European Union, here is, of course, Great Britain, but also Turkey and Norway, which is not an EU, but does possess some financial, support and the future support, we hope. So it is not just important to say words, but also to act. And by the way, Great Britain had announced another package of military aid. It's one of the 4 steps that we're seeing from the Prime Minister of Great Britain, saying that the countries should continue support Ukraine military to make it stronger on the battlefield.
Starmer also stressed that U.S. support remains vital. Do you think you can continue to rely on that support after the events of the past few days?
Well, of course, the support of the country, not just the administration, is vital, because it goes, far beyond the years of this or that president is in office. So I totally support these words. And by the way, Prime Minister Starmer said that Europe will not be buying another Minsk agreement. And I remind, Minsk agreement basically was a ceasefire in 2015, and it was violated. It was violated brutally by Russian Federation. And at that time, United States were not part of this format. So obviously, history tells us that United States has to be at the table. Of course, it will not be easy. And of course, the partners of United States, after what happened in Oval Cabinet, are asking themselves, not just in our region, not just in Europe, but in Asia, for example, they're asking themselves, can we rely on America as a partner? And I still, I still hope that the world can and should rely on America as a partner. But also Europe has to be, to get ready to take care of its own security. We have to be adults in the room, and we have to be strong. And as we see, President Trump is willing to speak only with strong.
Think of this moment as a platform. What's your message to the United States?
Well, our message, my message, and probably the message of all those leaders that were gathered around the table is that Europe is going to take its own fate in their hands, but also saying that it's about the values and it's not about changing, the mixing the what is good and bad. I mean, there is an aggressor and there is a country that is attacked, and you cannot change that. You cannot really, rewrite the narrative because it was one country who attacked another country. It doesn't matter how big is the country who is an aggressor. You cannot reward it.
And do you think this meeting sends a strong enough signal to the Kremlin?
Well, that's a good question. That's a good question because for many years, Kremlin just, knew that Europe can make good statements and good press releases, but at the end of the day, less in deeds. Oh, by the way, there's Canada, correct? Not just a European continent. But again, it has to be continued in real deeds. I'm sure that Munich conference was the first wake-up call, but what happened a few days ago in the United States, it's another wake-up call that, Europeans, which are, very big in GDP, big in population. And I think it was Prime Minister Tusk that said that it's a very weird situation that Europeans, 500 million or even 600 million, was the great GDP, are asking all the time America to, which is 300 million, to save them from Russia, which is 144, and the GDP, which is the same as the state of Texas.
That's a Ukrainian parliamentarian, Yevheniia Kravchuk. Many, many thanks for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Let's bring in DW's Nick Connolly, who is standing by in Kyiv. Nick, what are Ukrainians saying about the London summit's outcome?
Look, I think this is all very welcome, the fact that the Europeans are taking the initiative and not just waiting for some kind of deal, some kind of roadmap to be forced on them by Donald Trump. Right now, it looks like Donald Trump's plan seems to be basically just to force the Ukrainians into capitulating on Russia's terms. There's no sense that Trump is getting any concessions out of the Russians. So the idea of maybe a kind of French and British-led European kind of plan with maybe peacekeepers and maybe further promises of military aid for Ukraine beyond any kind of cessation right now of firing on the front lines, that is all something that people here in Ukraine see as a huge step forward. Because right now, the last kind of 6 months during the US election campaign, now the initial weeks and months of Trump in office, has basically seen kind of paralysis in Europe as the Europeans have been waiting to see how Trump would behave towards NATO, towards Ukraine. And now finally they are actually coming up with a plan, and one that is going to cost them a lot of political capital to get their populations to agree to sending troops, maybe to guarantee the peace in Ukraine, and also financially. But finally, they seem to have taken the jump and are moving forward.
Let's talk about the sense of morale there for a moment. After 3 years of war and the meltdown in the Oval Office between President Zelenskyy and Trump, do people believe a coalition of the willing can help Ukraine bring the fighting to an end?
Well, obviously, it can't do anything to stop Russia fighting on, and there are very serious doubts here in Ukraine that Vladimir Putin actually wants even a cessation of hostilities, let alone a kind of lasting peace. There is a real sense in this country that Putin is just using these negotiations with Trump to win time, to hope that maybe Trump and Ukraine fall out, as has happened, and that US support for Ukraine is, if not withdrawn, then at least reduced. We've heard very bullish talk out of Moscow talking about the fact that they still basically want all their initial war aims, and they even want Ukraine to give up bits of territory that it still controls that Russia annexed according to its constitution. But in terms of what this potential European initiative can do, it can give Ukraine the kind of certitude that if for a while the fighting is paused or longer term, that it does have some kind of protection, some kind of guarantee that if Russia tries to come again, that then there will be a European contingent here on the ground that will actually secure Ukraine's future. And it won't be like after 2014, where we saw countless infringements of the ceasefire, and then Russia eventually coming back and invading again.
That's DW's Nick Connolly in Kyiv. Thank you, Nick. After leaving the security summit in London, Ukrainian President Volodymr Zelenskyy then traveled to meet Britain's King Charles III. The king received the Ukrainian leader at his Sandringham estate in eastern England. They reportedly discussed Britain's ongoing support for Ukraine, with the monarch expressing solidarity for those who have suffered in the war. The visit was planned before Zelenskyy's recent clash with U.S. President Donald Trump in Washington. Outgoing German Chancellor Olaf Scholz also attended the summit in London. Scholz is heading the German government in a caretaker role after his election defeat last weekend. Here's some of what Scholz had to say after the summit ended.
We are together allies in the transatlantic alliance, and this is still the key of the security of the United States, Canada and the European states, member of NATO. In the last years, we enlarged NATO with new members like Finland and Sweden. We increased our spending for defense in Europe and in the United States, and this is the path we will follow in the future as well. And on the other hand, it is key that we all are understanding that it is our common task to support Ukraine, because it's a threat to the security architecture, not just of Europe, but also the world, that Russia invaded its neighbor country just for conquering part of the territory or all the territory. We cannot accept this, and we cannot accept that borders will be changed by force. So this is the basis for our cooperation, and everyone is willing to work on making this happen in the future as well. Aside of this, it is clear that every one of us is doing in our own interest what is necessary here. This means we will have to find ways to increase our defense spending, which is already planned. You know, Germany is spending 2% of its GDP for defense and is now discussing how to continue this increased spending and possibly even more due to NATO capabilities in the next years to come. And this is the same in many other European countries, and also when we look at the support to Ukraine. So I think the big task is to manage that this cooperation will continue.
DW Chief Political Editor Michaela Küfner is with me now in the studio. Michaela, what did you make of the outgoing German Chancellor's remarks?
Well, it was very interesting that he spoke at the same time as Keir Starmer, so we had to divide Labour here as well. He, before he got asked this question, which is a more profound question on the future of NATO and whether it will hold as an alliance, he kept stressing in his address that it was necessary to bolster Ukraine's ability to defend itself, also against any future attacks. And this somewhat jars with what Donald Trump said when he had this very unwelcoming reception or the scene in the White House when Donald Trump insisted, look, just having US people there in that mineral deal, there's no need for guarantees, just having US presence there will be enough. And that clearly is not enough for the Europeans. So to anybody asking themselves, okay, what does this mean? Is there a breakup between the EU and the US, or isn't there? Well, they're still on the same team, but clearly the Europeans, and along with them, Olaf Scholz, the still Chancellor of Germany, Europe's largest economy, are essentially introducing another language into these negotiations. Before it was Russian and US-American. Now it's clear Europe wants to do a bit of the drafting, but it's also willing to come up with the goods in terms of committing to serious defense spending in the future. What else did Scholz say about the summit? Well, he felt that he was specifically asked about what his role is right now, because we just had elections. And the future leader, most likely Friedrich Merz, the winner of the elections, the conservative CDU-CSU leader, wasn't at the table. He says everybody's fulfilling their roles here. And he's doing that by attending this summit, by making this firm commitment towards a future for Ukraine, bolstering Ukraine, which is interesting because his election campaign was partially also running on being cautious and not being too abrasive, not committing to too much in terms of both spending, but also in which weapons are delivered. And at the same time, he made clear that he is in communication whenever necessary with who is most likely the next leader of Germany, Friedrich Merz.
You made that clear, not promising too much. Will his remarks be seen as very strong support, robust support for Ukraine?
Germany currently, and that's the whole problem, is not in the position of having a chancellor on his way out and the next chancellor not quite in to be able to make any commitments. And what is part of these tedious negotiations here right now, potentially tedious ones, is how they're going to ensure this huge spending package that is needed. And here both sides are still being tactical because finding the money will require yet more debt. And they need to find a way to make this happen. And this may well involve the old parliament with the old majorities rather than the newly elected one.
As you know too well, Olaf Scholz lost the election last week. Is he viewed right now by other European leaders as a lame duck?
The short answer is yes. The appointments, let's put it this way, I saw the schedule of Friedrich Merz, the future chancellor, at the Munich Security Conference, and I saw his list, and it was quite clear. And also, particularly the United States Vice President met only with the future likely leader of Germany, but not with Olaf Scholz. And that's also the way he's being viewed. At the same time, the German voice is needed because German money and commitment is needed.
How long will the other European players here have to wait for the prominent position in Germany, for the new chancellor to step in and make his mark?
If I had a precise answer, I would be earning some serious money here. But Germany is moving fast. It's exactly 1 week after the elections, and we know that the second exploratory talks for the next coalition is already happening tomorrow. For Germany, that is lightning fast. It can take normally months until a coalition can be formed, and all parties sitting down at their table on Monday know they simply do not have the time.
That's DW's chief political editor, Michaela Küfner. As always, many thanks, Michaela.
You're welcome.